Well, last week we gathered in the same space to talk about resilience and how it's not a solitary achievement, but a communal act. We reminded ourselves that we need the collective strength to survive the trials of our individual lives. And I still believe that to my core. It is the foundation of our faith, but today I want to turn a little bit more inward. And I should begin by saying that I never preach a sermon don't need to hear myself. It's very, very apropos that I should have to think about our coping skills today, because I did not use any this morning. And in fact, when I was giving the message, I was thinking maybe I should have read Alexander and the Terrible, No Good, Very Bad Day this morning. This morning, I had to scrape off my car, and Jenny said, "Oh, you can take my car, so you don't have to scrape it off, and then I'll take yours." And I was like, and she's not even here, but because I said she could stay home, but not that I have to give her permission; she can do that on her own. But and then I came in and I heard about Fred's, the ice dam in Fred's office and some of the music being ruined. And then I went into my office, and there's an ice dam in my office, and it was ruining my father's couch, which he he just gave me under lots of conditions to take care of it. And I have to say, I can't thank Karen Zimmerman from the bottom of my heart for trying to dry it out. But it just kind of hit me the wrong way, because I'd been looking forward to painting my office, and they were going to put new ceiling tiles in this week, and all that is thwarted because we have to let the office dry out. And so all this was going on in my head while I'm trying to get ready for the service. And what I want to do when that's happening, and maybe you feel this way too, is like push everyone away. Just leave me alone, And John Barry, just, how John likes to joke. He said, "Oh, you look really shabby today." And I was like, "Oh, I was trying to look put together." But anyway, so, everything just was getting on my nerves. Everything was making me, and then Larry came in and said, "Oh, there's my minister." And I shut the door so I could straighten up. If community is the soil in which we grow, then our personal coping skills are actually the roots that anchor us into that soil. To grow, to truly transform, and to withstand the inevitability that sweeps across the landscape of every human life, storms that rage throughout our lives, we must tend to our own sore spots. We have to look for our own triggers. And I did not even think about how emotionally tied I was to that couch until it got rained on. If I'd thought of that before, I could have just said, "Oh, of course I'm feeling this because it's my father's couch, and of course I'm thinking of that." In his poem, Days by Billy Collins, he gives us a hauntingly beautiful image of time. He describes the fragility of each moment, perched precariously on top of the other, like a teacup, just ready to topple if we add one more weight. Doesn't it feel like that sometimes? Imagine a child playing with wooden blocks, stacking them together higher and higher, the tower getting wobblier with every breath. That's often how we manage our internal lives. We pile our failures from 5 years ago onto mistakes that we made this morning. We add the not enoughs, the moments where we felt like we fell short as parents or daughters or partners or citizens. We stack the quiet anxieties of the future on top of the unresolved grief of the past. Suddenly we're looking at a structure that feels increasingly unstable. We walk around on eggshells in our own lives. terrified that if one more thing goes wrong, one more flat tire, one more sharp word from a colleague, one more bill, the whole precarious pile will come crashing down. When I was a teacher, we called this piling behavior every day, not just in my students, but in myself. We had a name for it. We called it awfulizing. This isn't just a schoolyard term, though. It's a profound psychological concept. The term was famously coined by Dr. Albert Ellis, the founder of rational emotive behavior therapy, which was the precursor to CBT and all those other ways that we try to reframe the stories in our heads with more positive thoughts. Ellis was a pioneer who realized that human suffering often comes from the event, not from the events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. Ellis observed that we have a cognitive habit of inflating difficult situations. Let's say a missed deadline or a disagreement with a friend becomes unbearable or catastrophic because of all the other times we miss deadlines. He argued that if we don't just experience stress, we actively create it in our lives. We do this by convincing ourselves that a setback isn't just bad, it's the end of the world. When we awfulize, we lose our perspective. We stop seeing the single single block for what it is, a manageable problem. And we start seeing the total collapse of our mental peace. Ellis identified what he called irrational musts. I must be perfect. Life must be easy. People must treat me exactly how I want to be treated. When these musts aren't met, we don't just feel disappointed, we feel destroyed. This is why developing robust coping skills is a spiritual necessity. Coping skills are the structural supports for our precarious piles. They are the braces and the glue. They allow us to challenge those irrational shoulds and build a foundation that isn't shaken so easily. They allow us to view a mistake not as a fatal blow, but as a manageable moment we have the strength to weather. And isn't that why we come together each Sunday? We don't come here because we figured it all out. We come here because the pile is wobbling. We come here to carry the invisible weights of the week to this altar and symbolically drop it in the water. We come to let the frantic pace of our to-do lists, the quiet anxieties of our heart, and the sheer weariness that comes from simply trying to be enough in a world that constantly tells us we are not, and let it go. It's my hope that each week when we gather, you can set down that weight, if only for an hour. In the ritual of our gathering, I hope we find the space to restart. To recognize that while the pressures of life leave us worn and overwhelmed sometimes, we are not solo travelers. When we sing together, when we sit in silence, we are resetting the blocks. We are saying the pile may have toppled yesterday, but today I begin again in love. To understand the depth of this beginning again, we look to the great teacher, Quaker teacher, Parker Palmer. You know Parker Palmer's work. You know he's an influential author and activist, the founder of the Center for Courage and Renewal. And if you know his story, you know that his wisdom was forged in fire. Palmer has spoken with staggering vulnerability about his journey through clinical depression. He did not arrive at his insights from an easy place. He arrived there through the dark woods. He articulated a truth I want you to carry in your pocket this week. Self-care is neither a selfish act. It is a simple, good stewardship of the only gift we have, the gift we were born on earth to share with others. I'm going to say it again. Self-care is not a selfish act. It is the simple, good stewardship of the only gift we have, the gift we were born on earth to share with others. In many of our faith traditions, we are taught to give and give and give and give until we are empty. We are taught that self-care sounds like self-indulgence. But Palmer reminds us that coping skills are more than clinical tools. They are spiritual practices of stewardship. If you are a caregiver, a teacher, an activist, or a friend, you are a vessel. If that vessel is cracked by awfulizing, if it is brittle from a lack of rest, if it cannot hold the water that others need, by tending to our own needs, by practicing the liturgy of the everyday, we aren't turning our backs on the world. We are clearing the debris or the snow or the ice from the pathways of our compassion. We are making sure that when we show up for justice, we show up with a whole heart, not just the fragments of one. We see this intersection of self-care and social transformation clearly in the history of the Highlander Folk School, originally known as Ivanhoe Tech. Highlander was not just a school in the traditional sense. It was a radical sanctuary in the hills of Tennessee. It was a place where Black Southerners, denied an education for generations by the Jim Crow system designed to keep them small, came to reclaim their agency. This school was a laboratory for the civil rights movement. It was where Rosa Parks trained before she sat down on that bus. But what was the curriculum at the Highlander? It wasn't about strategy and law. It was about the internal work of resilience. Look at the stories of the women who led the way, the women like Helen Lewis and Maxine Waller and Linda Copeland. These women understood that identifying one's weaknesses was the first step towards transformation. For Maxine Waller, earning a GED wasn't about a piece of paper. It was about a map of a territory she once was told she could never have. It was the discovery of self-worth that changed her entire world. At Highlander, they practiced something revolutionary. They dramatized their struggles. They told their stories of pain and frustration out loud to a community who cared about them. They learned that naming things that hurt is the first step in healing. They found strength in vulnerability, realizing that their individual piles of worry were actually shared by the person sitting next to them. They taught that education, real soulful education, is an act of spiritual resistance. You cannot change the world if you're constantly being crushed by the weight of your own unexamined triggers. By learning to cope, by learning to name their value, they built the inner strength required to face the dogs and the fire and the hoses of the outside world. We often think of coping skills as clinical terms belonging in a therapist's office, but I want us to reclaim them as the liturgy of every day, a liturgy that is the work of the people. It is repeated practice that points us toward the sacred coping skills. Sacred coping skills are the deep breaths we take before we do a difficult conversation. centering ourselves so we speak from love rather than fear. They are the boundaries we draw to protect our peace of mind, saying no to the world so we can say a deeper yes to our souls. They are the ways we wrestle our fear into the shape of hope. When we understand our triggers, when we know that a certain tone of voice or a certain type of stress makes us want to awfulize, we actually gain a superpower. We gain the ability to choose our response rather than simply reacting. This self-knowledge equips us to choose a path that honors the inherent worth and dignity of ourselves and our neighbor. As we practice this soft, stubborn self-care, we forge an inner strength that allows us to engage more compassionately with a hurting world. The stories at Highlander weren't just tales of distress. They were blueprints for a new way of being. They showed us that the best protection we have from being harmed and from doing harm to others is the disciplined practice of self-awareness and self-care. As we move toward the close of our time today, let us commit to the soft, stubborn practice of returning to ourselves. Let today be a reminder that we are all on a journey where coping skills are not merely tools, but essential practices to nurture our spirit. We are stewards of the gift of our lives. I invite you to be stubborn in your self-care. Refuse to believe the lie that your worth is tied to your productivity. Refuse to believe that awfulizing voice that says one mistake is in line with the others in your story. And I invite you to be gentle and soft in our community. When you see someone else's pile beginning to topple, don't judge the height of their stack. Offer them the same grace you are learning to offer yourself. May we carry the lesson of the Highlander School, the grit of Parker Palmer, and the wisdom of our own hearts into the week ahead. Let us create pathways of resilience, not just for ourselves, but for all who are heavily laden. You are not alone. You are leaning on everyone around you, roots intertwined, growing toward the light.